Welcome to episode 34 of the Andrews and Sledges Cricket Podcast. I'm your host, Ashwin from Cincinnati in the US. With me, as usual, are DJ in London and Varun in Singapore. But this week, we have a very special guest joining us. For those of you who listen to other cricket podcasts, he's the host of Cricket Unfiltered, which is the News Corp podcast down in Australia. So joining us from Sydney is Andrew Menczel, also known as Menners. Menners, thank you very much for joining us on the show today.
Yeah, pleasure to be with you guys.
So just because, it's the middle of November, we're about a week out from the very long India tour of Australia that kicks off on November 21st, starts with some T20s, then there's tests all through December and wraps up with some ODIs in January. We thought Menners would be good to have on the show. So just quickly, what we're going to go through today, we're going to chat a little bit about Australian cricket in general, and it's been a little bit of a tumultuous year, so we'll ask him a little bit about what it's like to be in the eye of the storm down in Sydney. We'll then talk a little about the series coming up, India-Australia head-to-head. We'll then, just get a little bit of a sense from Menners about how the Aussie public thinks about India and the Indian team today. And then we'll wrap up with a couple of final segments and then our quiz, as always. So, gents, with that, I'm going to jump right in. And Menners, I'll start with you. Let's talk a little bit about, as quickly as we can summarize the past 6 to 10 months of Aussie cricket. Smith, Warner, and Bancroft were obviously banned from the game. There was Sandpaper Gate. I think all of us on our respective podcasts have talked a lot about it on the shows. But in a couple of minutes, what was your take on the entire situation? And do you think it was handled correctly by the Australian Cricket Board?
Well, that's a meaty question to get things going, guys, and one I could probably talk for about another hour and 45 minutes on. But look, let me just kind of sort of pick apart why the reaction was so big, and then whether I think the reaction was necessary. I think just the sheer sort of audacity of the crime meant that there was a large backlash in Australia. I mean, although ball tampering is sometimes might go on in world cricket, we've always seen ourselves as being separate from that. So I think it was a big shock for the Australian public. But then it was the perfect storm of situations. So we had that horrible press conference at the end of the day where the comments from Smith and Bancroft seemed so sort of blind to the reaction that they would get. And then, you wake up on a Sunday morning in Australia and it was a slow news day, and that the first thing you see is images of sandpaper coming out of underwear, and then Steve Smith sort of saying, "Oh, we just want to forget about this and move on." So that sort of kicked off the reaction, and then from there it was the biggest sporting story in Australia all year, but also just the biggest news story in years. So that sort of triggered things off, and why the reaction was so hot, I guess you'd call it. But I guess, what's come out since then is that why it happened was probably not just Warner and Bancroft and Smith making a judgment error, but also a failure of leadership going up the chain, and not just those three guys, but the coach, the media managers, the chairman, the CEO. I mean, this has precipitated huge amount of change in Australia, the way cricket's administered. So it's a failure of leadership right throughout Cricket Australia. I think that the bans being 1 year from international cricket weren't too far off the mark. Before the bans were handed down, I thought somewhere between 6 and 12 months would be appropriate. So they went on the 12-month side, which was harsher. But I think where the big error is that they've banned the players playing domestic cricket here. So I think that was a big mistake. They should have banned them from international cricket, but allowed them to play Sheffield Shield, which is our domestic first-class comp, and the Big Bash.
Thanks for that. That's a great summary. Varun, let me ask you really quickly. On Menners' show earlier this week, I heard a statistic, and hopefully I'm quoting it correctly, that the Australian cricket team has now fallen behind the Australian rugby team in terms of popularity of the game in the country. From Varun, do you think if India had any sort of similar situation, and hopefully we never do, but do you think anything like this would happen? Would this sort of a reaction, either from the board or from the people, would happen in India?
I think there would be a similar reaction, but I think the biggest difference for us is, I hate to say it, but there is only one sport in India, right? Even though there are many others. So I think if this was to happen in India, I think there will be a bit of an outcry. Action will need to be taken against the people involved. But you kind of have to move on because there's so many people who are just involved with this game, and they're not going to switch to another sport. So I think for me, that's the biggest difference when you look at just India. Yeah.
So DJ, coming to you, Manners mentioned a little bit about how there's been a shake-up across management. I mean, over the last few weeks, we've seen Mark Taylor, everybody from Mark Taylor to Peaver to the entire management and a lot of the staff across the ACB has resigned. I don't know if they have replacements for all of them just yet. Do you think that's the right thing, or really, do you think that's a little bit of overkill at this point?
Well, I don't know. I'm not actually close enough to it at the moment to be able to tell, but it seems like everyone seems to have gone. It's a little bit like Brexit in the UK, if you ask me. That everyone who's kind of caused it has just taken off and left someone else to deal with it, which, I mean, it can't be a good thing in some ways. You need a little bit of continuity with governance in the game. And I agree with Menos. I mean, I think it's the team losing so much as well that's got the public down. I think you quoted actually 2 out of 13 games this year, ODI games or something like that. I mean, I think that's the trouble. The game is popular in Australia, and it will remain popular in Australia. It's just going through a bit of a dip at the moment, and hopefully they come out of that this summer.
So, Manners, let me ask you a little about the bans. You mentioned them just at the end of your statement. I have been pretty outspoken on this show saying, it was a 12-month ban, but essentially when they were handed out, I think it was in February, I thought, hey, by the time 7 or 8 months comes around, they're going to say, all right, sentence served, they've learned their lesson, we should bring Smith and Warner back in time for the India tests. Is that at all a reality as you see it in Australia, or is just a skeptic in me thinking that they'll be back sooner rather than later?
Well, it's not out of the question. The Australian Cricketers Association have put a submission to Cricket Australia in the light of the reviews that the ban should be reduced. However, I think it's unlikely that they'll play in the Test series versus India. I think it's more likely they'll be allowed to play domestic cricket here from probably early next year. But I wouldn't rule it out. There is some pressure to get our best team on the park. And the fact that the reviews were so scathing of Cricket Australia means that the blame has to be appropriately shared, and maybe the players are suffering too much with this international ban. But I still think it's unlikely, and funny, public opinion here is split right down the middle. Half the people say, no, they're cheats, they should serve out the ban, and another half say it was too much. So it's a very much a divisive debate.
Varun, let me come to you again. Do you think, having seen the ODI performances, and I think it's 5 series in a row now that the Aussies have lost, do you think Smith and Warner will be?
You have to mention that, sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. I heard it on your show, so it felt like it was important to repeat. Do you think Smith and Warner will be a shoo-in right back into this Aussie 11 the day they're eligible to play again?
Yeah, for sure.
I think yes, they'll be desperately rushed back. I think, the day before their ban's up, they'll be booking flights to meet the Australian team wherever they are.
And do you think the team will do you think there's any animosity within the team at all still, or do you think the team just accepts them with arms wide open?
So I think the only one that has a sort of complication there is David Warner. I'm not 100% sure of the details, but I think his relationship with the team is more complicated than Smith and Bancroft. So I think they'll all be accepted back. I just think Smith and Bancroft will find it easier to mend fences, whereas I think David Warner will have a little bit more work to do. But if he can sort of score runs and behave off the field, I think they'll pretty quickly mend fences because he's such a good player.
Absolutely. I think he'll probably have to be a bit, like I've mentioned before, elitely honest with the rest of the team, and he might find his way back in. But
well, I know elite honesty has copped a lot of criticism, and it should never have been publicised. But I do think that in big organisations, you need binding principles to unify
Absolutely.
and give kind of a direction and belief. And often when these things from companies or whatever are taken out of context, they seem to be quite amusing and you can poke fun at them. But within an organisation, I think you do need something to bind you together and give you a sense of purpose and direction, whether it can sound funny, you know, when it's posted on Twitter.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I totally agree with you on that, actually.
Yeah, we actually talked about that a little on a previous show where we all sort of work in the corporate world and in one way or the other. And this stuff is normal to be seen inside. The question is when they take it outside, you know, when it went public on Twitter, etc. That's when it seemed to invoke a little bit of a reaction. DJ, let me ask you. I asked Varun about getting a spot back in the Australian side. February of 2018 is when the Sandpaper Gate and the incidents happened. April of 2018, both Smith and Warner lost their spots in their respective IPL teams. Do you see them making a return for IPL 2019 as well and getting spots in the first 11?
I think they're going to be back.
Yeah.
I've actually found it quite weird that they've been around the world playing cricket while they can't play at home. I think, Manoj, you may have mentioned this a couple of weeks ago. Was it when you were speaking to, I think maybe Gideon Haigh that you were speaking to? And you mentioned this, that they were just going around the world and they weren't playing Sheffield Shield cricket, and you were talking about playing the Big Bash and they should be allowed to do that to bring the crowds in and all of that. So it's just quite odd that they don't play cricket in Australia, but I think they've been to Canada. I think
I saw them both. Yeah.
Yeah, so they've gone to other parts of the world. I think they're in Abu Dhabi. They may play the PSL, the Bangladesh League as well. Obviously the IPL. So, I mean, they will walk into any T20 league team that they choose to play for, right? But I've just found the ban really oddly applied. I don't know, Menos, whether you've got any particular thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, look, it's a strange one, and that's the problem. You're going to have Steve Smith, I think, going over on December 19th to play on the Dubai T20X League, just when our Big Bash is kicking off. And you've got David Warner going to the Bangladesh Premier League. So, yeah, Cricket Australia have messed this one up. I mean, there's no doubt about it. They've messed it up. They should be playing in the Big Bash and our domestic first-class competition. It's been a massive mistake, and it hurts the Big Bash because we need star power. You know, it's not like the IPL where we have, you know, every international star coming. We find Big Bash finds it harder to attract the best players because there's no window. So if you've got our two best batsmen available in these circumstances, you'd be mad not to have them.
Yeah,
and I think it's just a shame for fans like us. I mean, we were looking forward to India going out there. I think the three of us were pretty sure that the bans would be overturned by the time India got there, because the BCCI would have made sure that the best Australian team was playing India.
But don't you want to win?
Not.
Don't you guys want to win? I mean, you've never won.
Yeah, but it's not
never won in Australia. Ever won.
Thanks for reminding us of that. I think we all said it's a win with a little bit of an asterisk, right? We don't want the win with the asterisk. We want to win against
That's the trouble, yeah. You don't want the win with the asterisk, no Steve Smith. We don't want to give you any excuses, basically.
So that's as good. I think that's as good a transition as any. We've talked a lot about the past. Let's talk a little about the future. So India play Australia again. I think scheduled pretty interestingly, with starting with the T20s and going to test, and such that January is the ODIs. You know, with both sides trying to finalize their ODI squads and their lineups for the World Cup. So Varun, let me start with you. From the Australian side, that's lacking Smith and Warner. It's, you know, maybe in the T20s to start, because they have not announced their test squad. But is there anybody in particular that India should be fearful of?
So the way I see it is, we've watched a lot of these guys play T20, right, over the last few years. I think any of them as individuals are match winners, right? Whether it's Finch or Lynn, Maxwell. I mean, we've seen Darcy Short as well. So I think any of them are match winners on their day. The issue is, how do they come together against a very experienced India T20 team, and on the back of losses. So, I mean, I'm going to put my hand up and say, I think Finch will stand out. He's got to stand up as captain. So he's the guy to watch out for me.
DJ, anybody from the Australian side that you want to watch out for?
I think across the board, it's going to be the bowlers for me. That is Australia's strength. It's Cummins, Hazelwood, Stark. It's those guys, I think, that will really make the difference. And Sean Marsh, who's been in good form with the bat, I think he will find his way into the test team through his good form against South Africa of late. Just those guys for me that I think will stand out to some
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it's that last inning. You can have a pretty bad run, but it's that last innings that stays in people's mind. We saw that with KL Rahul in England and Rishabh Pant to an extent. We're seeing that with Sean Marsh. I think he's going to find his way probably into this side just based on that last innings against South Africa. Menes, let me pivot and ask you from an Indian team touring Australia standpoint, who are the Indian players that you guys are watching out for most closely?
Well, look, all the talk about this Indian team from an Australian perspective is that you're bringing actually a really strong stable of fast bowlers. Normally, India has a strong batting lineup, although they have traditionally struggled when there's a bit of bounce on Australian wickets. But still, there's been some great moments of Indian batting in Australia, and always a strong spinning attack. But this time, it's the fast bowlers, and if the Indian fast bowlers can get a little bit of movement, just enough, then I think they'll really trouble the Australian batting lineup. We saw in the UAE, Muhammad Abbas really take Australia's batting lineup apart with, medium pace that just nibbled a bit. And I think, the Indian pace attack has a real chance at our top order if they can, perform the way they did in England at times. I think they'll be ones to watch out for. So it's the pace bowling. And I think if Australia is smart, that we will leave a little bit of life in the wickets, a little bit more grass than normal, so the games are quite competitive. And so that'll bring the Indian pace bowlers in. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to the Indian pace bowling.
Yeah, I think all three of us have said separately as well. This is unusual for us. We're used to traveling with strong batters and spin attacks, but just not used to having, four fast bowlers that could make the side, maybe five if you think about it, that could make our test team. So very, very excited about that.
So can I ask, who do you think will be the fast bowlers in the first test for India?
I can answer that first. I think your sure shots in there, assuming no injuries, are Ishant Sharma and Jasprit Bumrah. I think they're the more experienced ones. I would have said Bhuvaneshwar Kumar probably a few months ago, but he had an average England series. So I think those two are, the Ishant and Bumrah are sure shot. I think they're going to decide on Bhuvi versus Mohammad Shami based on the pitch and how they're looking in the net. Varun, do you want to take that next?
Yeah, for me, I think I would go with Bhuvi, Bumrah, and Ishant, and I would say they'll play Hardik Pandya as the fourth.
I think it's actually going to be Shami, Ishant, and Bumrah. I think Bhuvi is going to sit out because Bhuvi actually moves the ball off the deck more. He kind of swings it in the air. He nibbles it a little bit, but it depends on the pitch, I suppose. If there's life in it, as Manu suggests, that then Bhuvi is likely to come in instead of one of the others. I don't see Shami not playing in this Indian 11, especially after the tour of England that he had, to be honest.
So and how many guys have you got playing? 13? You guys running out 13.
We just can't agree on our best bowlers. We've got so many of them. That's the trouble now.
For what it's worth, the three of us can't really agree on our batting lineups either, and we seem to struggle with that a little. So.
We could have Kohli at 4, 5, and 6. That would help. But apart from that.
At least when we disagree, one of us on the show is right? So that's the beauty of it. We get to claim something.
Yeah, we cover all bases.
That's right. So quickly on that series, Manners, one of the things that was in the news a little bit, about a few months ago, is when they made the decision not to play a day-night test. Have you had a chance to go to any of them, or what has the Australian public generally felt about day-night test matches? Because it's really been headlined in Australia. I don't think we've ever seen one in India yet.
So I went to the day-night test 2 years ago against South Africa, and it was an interesting experience. You can't quite see the pink ball in person as well as you can see it on TV. There's certain times when you lose the ball, which is, I'm quite, an experienced cricket watcher, so you sort of think you know where the ball is going to be. But there's no doubt that the future of Test cricket needs some element of day-night Test cricket. There's absolutely no doubt about that. Whether India should have agreed to play this first test day night is another question. I think that maybe for the good of the game they should have. But then on the other hand, I can see why if you've never won in Australia before, you're not going to give Australia an advantage and play the first test with a pink ball, which you're not experienced with and should give a slight advantage to the Australians. So, yeah, I can see both sides to this one. I don't think there's an easy answer to it. My question is, if conditions in India make it difficult to play pink ball cricket because of the dew, then the incentive for India to pick up day and night test cricket's not quite as much as, say, we have here, where it seems to go pretty well.
Yeah, I also think I think the other thing is the stadiums in India are packed no matter what time of the day it is. So long as you have one of the top 4 or 5 teams playing. But tell me, Manners, I was watching the Australia South Africa on TV, were you shocked at how empty the stadiums were for the games, especially on like a Sunday?
Yeah, I was surprised that we didn't get more of a crowd, actually. Very surprised. They were very low crowds. But I think, normally cricket at this time of the year is not as well as tended as sort of December, January. But still, they were disappointing crowds.
Yeah, I think that's fair. We chatted about this as well, watching on TV. It was surprising. So I do know, I think I heard the first T20 in Sydney, India, Australia is already sold out. So that's a good sign. Let's hope between both sides they can bring out some crowds for the series. So before we wrap up, talk about the upcoming India-Australia series, I'm going to ask each of you to predict your results. So let's start with T20s. They're playing 3 T20 matches. DJ, you first. What are you calling for the result?
I'm going to go 2-1 to India.
Varun?
Same.
And Manners?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know. Who's going to...
3-0 Australia. Come on. Good old Glenn McGrath.
4-0 Australia. If I'm picking anything, I would say India have to start favourites. So probably India 2-1.
Got it. So we have unanimous decision that Australia is going to win.
Ashwin, you have to say 3-0 now.
Yeah, I have to say 3-0 to India, so let's say that. But all 4 of us on the show are saying India's going to win the T20s. Let's go to the tests quickly. 4 test matches. I think they're Adelaide, Perth, Melbourne, and then finally Sydney. Manners, I'll start with you this time. Prediction for the test scoreline?
Say 1-1.
1-1 with 2 draws. All right, Varun?
I'm going to say 2-1 to India.
Ooh, India's first victory in Australia. And DJ?
Yeah.
I'm going to say 2-1 to Australia. I'm just a pessimist. I've watched it happen too many times. I've just seen it happen. I want India to win. Make no mistake about that. But it's a team that I've seen lose too many times, especially in England. I mean, I watched them lose for 1 year, right? So
DJ's trying the opposite of Glenn McGrath.
I'm trying to jinx it.
He's like, we lose 4-0.
There you go.
And I would be happy to be wrong.
I'm going to call 2-2 actually, because funnily enough, we haven't seen nearly enough draws with India in the last little while, right? Like pretty much all the tests we've played in all the last 2 series have had a result. So I don't predict any draws. I'm thinking it'll end 2-2, and all of us will feel frustrated that there wasn't a 5-match series and they left it at 4. All right. So I think the ODI series starts more than 2 months away, so I'm not going to ask you guys to predict that. But really quickly,
Australia 3-0.
Okay, there you go. That first.
Followed by
he's
World
found his
Cup
voice.
win as well.
All right. So just before we wrap up about the India-Australia series coming up, I wanted you guys to look back a little bit and share with us your favorite moments from India-Australia history, and hopefully we can create some new favorites in the upcoming series. But DJ, let me start with you this time. What's your favorite memory of India playing Australia?
2001 Eden Gardens. Easy. That's just an easy answer, right? Yeah. And
that's my worst memory.
I went first.
Coincidentally.
I actually sat and watched the whole 4 days play while I was supposed to be studying for my exams. And Dravid and Lakshman came out to bat, and I just watched the whole day's play, and then I watched the next day's play, and as you can see, my math scores were not as good as they should have been. But anyway.
But Menal, just to share with you, like, that game is so important to us. Whenever any one of us meet, right, which is probably once a year, we make it a point to take an hour out and watch the whole game on YouTube. Like, I don't know if that makes us sad or if that makes us happy, but yeah, that's how important that game is. But since I'm talking, I'll just go next. Mine is actually after 2001. Mine is the Brisbane Test in 2003, the famous one where Dravid takes off his cap after hitting it into the covers or square.
It's Adelaide.
Sorry, Adelaide, not Brisbane. Adelaide in 2003.
Brisbane is where Ganguly scored his 144.
Yeah. So Ponting hit a double century, Dravid hit a double century, and then of course Dravid hit the winning run. So that was my favorite.
I'll go next because we're speaking about good India moments. But Mine is actually 1998, and I remember the build-up of Warren versus Tendulkar, and it was probably in the press. I don't know if it was like this in Australia, but in India, it was in the media all, for 3 or 4 months before it started, and this is before the internet was as big as it is. So it was all every day. The newspaper had a big headline about Warren versus Tendulkar, and just seeing that battle and Warren winning the first little bit, and then Tendulkar hitting him out of the park consistently is one of my most favorite memories. Manners, let me end with you. Hopefully, we'll end on an Australian positive.
You can
Well,
give
actually,
us
this
three, actually, because we've given you 3 moments, so it's only fair.
Well, okay, I'll start. Number one, India never winning here is a good memory. Number two, quite seriously now, when I was a very young man, a very young boy, I went to see Sachin Tendulkar play at the SCG. I think it was 1991-92 season, and Shane Warne's first Test match, and Sachin Tendulkar got his second Test history. I think he made about 148. I mean, he was 18 or 19, and you could see this guy was a genius already. So he made a big impression on me, and in the same match, Ravi Shastri scored a double century. So that's probably that match I'll never forget because of the Tendulkar 100 and Warne's debut. I just think it's a sort of important moment in cricket history. And then finally, I guess, Australia winning in India in 2004 after so long of trying and coming so close in 2001 where we thought it would happen, and Laxman and Dravid just ripped it from our hearts at the last minute. 2004, I think many Australians hold that series close to their heart.
Interestingly, we've all picked Test moments, by the way.
Yeah,
we haven't talked
was
about
just
the
gonna
2003 World Cup.
2003 World Cup, 2015 World Cup semi-final. I thought Manners was going to mention those, but I'm glad he didn't.
There's
remember-
nothing to talk about. There's nothing to talk about.
I've got a good moment for you. I went to the 1999 World Cup in England, and there was a Super Six match, India v Australia, and I went out at lunch to get a burger and a pint, as you do in England, and came back, and Tendulkar was out in the first over. I missed the batting.
Glenn McGrath
Tried to
caught behind.
tried to
No,
pull.
he was caught behind.
No.
McGrath.
So good, so good. And the Indian fans were already streaming out. Just excellent.
2003 was when he tried to pull him. That's when McGrath caught and bowled him. But McGrath.
Oh yeah, sorry, 2003.
Yeah, he was caught behind. It was horrendous.
I like that you guys are arguing whistles. It's very appropriate.
We're just arguing facts. That's the best.
The point, I think the point is it only comes down to the shot selection, because in both years McGrath would have bowled the same ball at the same spot, so it would have basically been up to the batsman.
All right, guys. On that happy note, I want to just pivot and talk really quickly before we end with our quiz about the ICC Women's World T20 that's going on. So, Group B, India and Australia both at the top, both undefeated. Australia's won 3 from their 3. India's won both theirs. And I think it's on Saturday, the 17th, India and Australia face off, which is both their final group games. So, and at the same time, we've seen Alyssa Healy and Harmanpreet Kaur at the top of the run scorers list. Manners, what is the reaction to the growth of women's cricket in Australia? Obviously, the Women's Big Bash has been a big factor. And how are folks viewing the Women's T20?
It's the absolute success story of cricket in this country. I could not really have imagined how successful women's cricket has become. It's very well watched on television. There's the Australian women's team. A lot of the players are becoming household names. So it's an incredible growth, and the Women's Big Bash has been central to that, being such a great event for families and kids. And it's just been a really positive part of cricket in this country. And, I guess while all these reviews of Cricket Australia have pulled up a lot of negative stuff, the one area that they've been really good on is promoting and growing the women's game. And I have a daughter who's 12, and I know that, she gets a real buzz out of seeing these women's cricketers as heroes and seeing them play. So I think it's a great thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's fantastic, and I've been trying to watch as much of it as I can. We've been talking about it a little bit. It's nice to see the same happening in India as well, which is a cricketing powerhouse, probably a little bit behind where the Australians are, but, most of the probably at least half of the 11 Indian players now have household recognition, and people are looking forward to hearing them play. So there's many icons of the game coming out. So very, very excited. We'll keep watching it, and we'll keep talking about it on our show as well. So,
in fact, we think Harmanpreet can bat at 5 for India, right? Solve a lot of the issues. So,
well, we don't have somebody to slot into 5, so that might be just right. All right, folks, thank you very much for all the great insights. As we like to do sometimes on the show, we're going to wrap up our episode today with a little bit of a quiz. So what I've pulled together is a series of questions. I'll go around asking you one each. All of these questions are about India v Australia. So all the stats are just from when India and Australia faced off. So, Manners, we're going to go to you first as our special guest. I'm going to ask you a question. If you get it wrong, I'll offer it up to one of the other guys by random to see who can steal. And if you steal, you get a half point. I'll tally up points, and at the end, whoever wins gets to brag on Twitter. So, Manners, for you, question 1. The last time India faced Australia was in March 2017 in Dharamshala in a test match. Who were Australia's opening batsmen at that match?
Matt Renshaw and David Warner.
Well played. First question, 1 for 1. Nicely done. I thought that was a trick question. I don't know if either of the other guys would have got Matt Renshaw, but anyway. DJ, let's go to you next. Same question. Last time India played Australia in Dharamshala in March 2017, who were the openers for India?
Oh, we were playing musical chairs then. KL Rahul's one of them, I think. Or had he done his shoulder by then? Oh, God.
This is... Yeah, DJ, you have to
thinking
answer
aloud.
too.
I'm
You
not
can't be
thinking aloud.
scared.
So he did his shoulder in the...
Are you Googling? Are you Googling this?
Yeah,
My hands are here. My hands are here.
I hear keys tapping.
DJ
I'm going to go
does
with
this.
Parthiv Patel and Vijay.
That's incorrect. Varun, can you steal?
Oh, I know who it was. Oh,
Murli Vijay and Shikhar Dhawan.
it's Gautam Gambhir.
Also incorrect, and DJ, your turn is gone. Manners, can you steal again?
Oh,
Probably not, but I'll go Murali, Vijay, and KL Rahul.
You can steal. That's a half point for Manners. Well played.
what?
Vijay.
my
Oh, I thought
God.
Rahul had done his shoulder. He like fell over.
Well done, Manners.
Pretended to be
He
dead.
was playing in that test. All right, so that was DJ's question. Varun, I think the one that you landed on is a little bit easier. If you add up all the history of head-to-head matches, India versus Australia in tests, Sachin Tendulkar scored the most runs cumulatively. Who's second on that list?
Ricky Ponting.
That is correct. That's a full point. Incidentally, Ricky Ponting, Sachin and Ricky are 1 and 2 on the ODI list as well. So just thought that was a fun fact.
It is fun.
Yeah, well, Sachin and Ricky also played most of the matches, but it's nice that Ricky wasn't first on that list. All right. Head-to-head in tests for India versus Australia, who has the highest batting average? Manners, this is for you.
Good question. Steve Smith.
That is incorrect. DJ, you get to steal first on this one.
Is it across all formats?
No,
Don Bradman.
test matches. It is Don Bradman. See, when you think about it out loud, it's an easier
One test match, isn't it?
test matches. 178.75. He played 6 innings against India with 4 centuries and a half century. So that's a half point to DJ. So the scores as they stand are 1 for Varun, 1.5 for Manners, and a half point for DJ.
I was almost going to answer Michael Bevan to that question, but that's why I clarified.
Yeah, not all formats. But
The
Michael
test average.
Bevan might average more than 178 even in ODIs. He just never got out. Okay, DJ, you're next. Head-to-head in test matches across both countries, who's taken the most wickets?
Oh.
Head to head. Anil Kumble.
That is correct. Fun fact, of the list of top wicket takers in India-Australia head-to-head matches, 8 out of the top 10 bowlers are Indian. So I was surprised by that. I feel like maybe Australia's just rotated through their bowlers, haven't played as many matches, but 8 out of the top 10 wicket takers were Indian. So that was a fun
They just
Interesting.
evenly they got our batsmen all out, right? Like they all got
Yeah,
their
they
much,
just shed all the wickets.
because none of them
No,
all the time.
no one guy like Kumble had to bowl 100 overs every game.
pretty much. Okay, Varun, this one is for you. This time we're talking about ODIs. So in all India-Australia ODIs, which batsman who has played at least 10 innings has the highest strike rate? And the reason I put that caveat is because Piyush Chawla played 2 deliveries, made 6 runs, So if you sort, then he's got a strike rate of 300. So for a batsman who played at least 10 innings, who has the highest strike rate?
I'm going to say Adam Gilchrist.
That's not correct. Manners, can you steal that one?
Adam. How many innings?
At least 10. I'm just trying to eliminate the bowlers.
All right, so Glenn Maxwell.
Oh, that is correct. You are on fire today. Maybe you're Googling.
Wow.
No.
Maxwell is.
That's awesome.
That's a great
That's
answer.
awesome.
Actually,
Well
played.
I
done.
wasn't even going with that. That's a great answer.
Well played. All right, actually, it comes back to Manners' question, if I'm not mistaken. I'm really bad at keeping track of this. All right, Manners, in the famous 2000 and 2001 series that DJ alluded to earlier, who was the highest run scorer?
God. Well, I mean, the obvious answer is Laxman. I'll go Laxman.
That is not correct.
Oh, no. Is it
Matty Hayden.
Oh,
Matt Hayden?
DJ.
I was
Scored.
just going to say Hayden.
Answer.
All right, well
You're
played.
going to him for all the steals first, by the way, Ashwin. You're going
Oh,
to
I'm
DJ for
I'm
every
just
steal.
rotating in my screen. You guys are in clockwise order. I'm going clockwise order, but that's fair. All right. I will give you. So the scores are 2 for DJ, 2 for Manners, and 1 for Varun. Varun, I'm going to ask the last question I have for you because I have some fun tiebreakers at the end. But just quickly on that one, Matty Hayden made 549 runs, 2 centuries, 2 50s in 6 innings, and VVS made 503. So close, but he was second place. Varun, last question.
Are you literally just skipping me because like you want to go to your brother to ask the question?
Because I want all 3 of you to be alive for the tiebreak.
This is just. Yeah. Okay, go on.
All right. There's nothing
Go
at
on.
stake for these questions. All right, Varun, head-to-head in T20s internationals, who has the most runs?
Virat Kohli.
That is correct. 423 at an average of 60, striking at over 144.
It's like it gives you it gives you the long hops. It's just like
Dude, he gave you all the half questions, okay?
All right.
And,
Let's keep
and,
going.
and plus, okay.
Okay, I have 3
We have a
questions.
guest on the show.
The last few questions, the way this works is I'll ask each of you to guess, and the closest wins. Okay. So, question 1: in that 2001 famous series, what percent of India's total runs did VVS Lakshman make? DJ, I'm going to start.
I've
with
got to
you.
guess a percentage.
Yeah, you got to guess a percentage, and the closest wins. I don't expect any of you will get it exactly. I have it to 2 decimal places. I'm hopeful you're not that good.
17.2%.
Okay, DJ.
25.7%.
And Varun.
I'm going to say 20%.
It is 26.77%.
Oh.
Very close. Well said. He scored more than a quarter. Incidentally, Hayden scored like 32, 33% of the Aussie runs in that inning series. So that was a big one. All right, DJ takes the first one. Second question. The last big match India played Australia in ODIs was the 2015 World Cup semi-final. How many players from the Australian 11 that played that semi-final are in the T20 squad for the matches that start next week? DJ, you answer first.
2.
Varun?
Yeah, my answer is also 2, but...
Okay, that's fine. And Manners, do you have an answer?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to say, 5.
Oof. So both the other guys are right. The answer is actually 2. Bonus points for either of you. Do you know which 2 they are?
Maxwell and Finch.
Yeah, Finch.
Well played. Yeah, so correct. Of the 2015 semi-final, Maxwell and Finch are in the T20 squad. The others, just for reference, are Smith, Warner, Watson, Clark, Faulkner, Haddin, Mitchell Johnson, Mitchell Stark, and Hazelwood. So it's interesting to see how in just over 3 years, those guys played that much.
Stark and Hazelwood aren't in the...
They're not in the T20 squad,
are they?
interestingly. Yeah.
They're resting.
Yep. All right, last question, guys. So I don't remember who's where, but I'll get tally scores at the end. Same question for India. How many players that played for India in the 2015 semi-final are in the Indian T20 squad going forward? Varun, you answer first this time.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Manners
3.
and DJ.
I'm gonna.
I was
go
at
with,
this game. Good memories.
Oh.
Good win.
Oh.
I shouldn't
I'm
have
gonna
brought
go
it
with. I'm gonna go with 5.
up. Oof. And Varun takes that one. The answer is 4.
Yeah.
It's Rohit, Dhawan, Kohli, and Umesh Yadav. Did you guess that fourth one being Umesh? Did you know that?
He just made it up.
No, I just knew there's one bowler.
Yeah. So,
I thought it was Bhuvi.
so the others who played that match were Rahane, Raina, Dhoni, Jadeja, Ashwin, Shami, and Mohit Sharma. So several still in the reckoning, but none of them in the T20 squad.
So Shami isn't in the T20 squad. I thought Shami was in. That's why.
No, Shami's in the test squad. He's not in the...
Oh, that explains it. Anyway.
Come on, mate.
When's
Good
the last
one.
time Shami
Good
played in
one.
T20 other than for Delhi Daredevils? All right, so because the first section was a tie, and I think each of you did pretty well in the
A tie.
breakers.
Let's call it a tie.
I'm going to call this one a three-way tie. Thank you guys for playing the quiz. Everybody's a winner at the game at Edges and Sledges. On that happy note, we've done a little bit
Where the points don't matter.
where the
points
everything is
don't
made up
matter.
and the points don't matter. Gents, thank you very much for joining. I didn't mention this at the beginning of the show, but we are in 4 separate time zones. I think Manners and I are 16 hours apart, and DJ and Varun are somewhere in between. So pretty impressive feat that we were able to make this work. Manners, thank you for being a guest on the show. Do you want to quickly tell our listeners how they can find you and find your show?
Yeah, just search the Cricket Unfiltered Podcast on where you listen to podcasts, or you can find me on Twitter at @Ameners, AMENNERS.
Great. So thank you again for joining the show. For the rest of you guys, please
Pleasure.
like, share, and subscribe to the podcast. Help us spread the word. This is how we grow. We will be eagerly watching the India-Australia women's game this weekend, and then preparing ourselves for the India-Australia men's T20 series coming up next week. Thank you very much for joining us. We'll be back with you again soon.